Tropical storm Kirk dumped heavy showers on Barbados, flooding several areas. Government defends its decision not to institute a national shutdown. And a call to action to combat childhood obesity.
Credible, balanced, committed. This is the CBC Evening News.
And a very good evening too. I'm Lisa Lord with the CBC Evening News. And our top story, a strong defense tonight of government's decision not to order a national shutdown after Tropical Storm Kirk dumped heavy rains for more than 13 hours on the island between last night and this morning. It came as Acting Prime Minister Dale Marshall and emergency officials assessed the impact of the storm. Our Ryan Broom has more.
Speaking at the Department of Emergency Management, where he was flanked by Acting Attorney General Edmund Hinkson and Information Minister Senator Lucille Moore, the Acting Prime Minister says that the decision taken not to shut down the island yesterday was based on the best possible advice. He says at the time advice is taken, where weather systems are concerned, one can never be absolutely sure how it would go, but they were ultimately satisfied that the right decision was made under the circumstances. He adds that the expert advice was again utilized in making the decision not to order a national shutdown again today.
We had always been informed by the Met Office that, I guess they call it the tail of the system, would always have had some high winds and the possibility of rain. But of course, I think it is fair to say that we were focusing more on what was coming towards us at that point in time. We weren't caught unawares. It became evident that we were going to suffer rain and so on, but there was less of an issue because by the time it came, by the time it was expected to come, we knew that Barbados would have been at home safe and sound.
Mr. Marshall adds that national shutdowns have wide implications for areas such as the island's ports of entry, and as was the case today, it would have also had major implications for the ability of weekly and monthly paid workers to access timely important services.
My colleague ministers and I don't make decisions based on whimsical perspectives. We make decisions based on our best advice. We have well-trained technocrats who give us that advice. To some extent, we may have some views, but we try to be guided by the experts who we've invested millions of dollars in training, and I think that has worked well.
Meanwhile, the Acting Attorney General gave an overview of efforts overnight by emergency personnel.
We, of course, have had some flooding in some areas, and defense force, the fire service would have assisted in that. The centers that were open, I think about 5 or 6 centers would have been hurricane, and centers and shelters would have been open last night. None were used to our information. In other words, those persons who were rescued would have gone to family and friends, and that is great for the centers, really a last resort.
And then going forward, Acting Prime Minister Marshall says they've learned some lessons from the experience.
This has certainly been a test of our readiness and a test of our structures. We will certainly be conducting a review. It would be wrong for me to talk about those issues at this point in time, but I can say to you that there were some weaknesses that were very evident. That being said, though, there was a level of gallantry that was exhibited certainly by members of the BDF, the fire service, and the police force in terms of our rescue efforts. And if there's one thing that this has shown us is that we do have first-class capacity in those areas. We will be conducting a review over the next few days, and those lessons that we've learned, I think, will point us in the right direction.
Ryan Broom, CBC News.
And when the time came for businesses to reopen at midday, most of them were ready to accept customers. A CBC team visited a surprisingly busy Bridgetown where people brushed aside the early morning conditions, determined to continue carrying out their business as usual. Supermarkets and stores on Swan Street had activity nothing short of the usual as vendors set up quickly to ply their trade. One of them spoke to us.
It wasn't much different than normal. I guess that people don't plan what they can do. If they can come out to work or not. Right? Because I don't think the weather really stopped nobody. Because people get used to the same thing over there. Sometimes you can get rain, you get storm. Nothing don't happen. Because if you really realize, a lot of people ain't really went banning and stuff this time. I rush to supermarkets, people take the time. You know what I'm saying? Because whatever God do is well done.
Well, this afternoon was a far cry from yesterday evening when Barbadians were subjected to torrential showers, flooding and high winds as Tropical Storm Kirk really began to make his presence felt. The system resulted in several people having to be rescued by emergency services. Kent Gerson tells us more.
Early yesterday evening, the heavy rains began, and in just a few hours, reports of flooding began to surface from areas like Warrens and Tudor Street, among many others. Over at the Princess Alice Terminal, some commuters huddled together, trying their best not to get wet as they waited for transport board buses. The Department of Emergency Management also indicated that a number of people were assisted by emergency personnel after water trapped them in their homes. By morning, some of the water had run off, but many areas still remained flooded. One of them was Murphy's Pasture in Bridgetown.
All the furnitures get wet. They had to take out the storage room from down here, and the water was waist deep. About here in a disaster. You think the plant house want cleaning and whatever?
My concern down here is every time the rain fall, we getting flooded with water in it again. This house last night, water was in this next door house, water getting there. And right now, you know, I don't even know what to do. My belly escaped by my teeth last night with water. In my house side, that's where he escaped. But water was on the surface water. Right?
From last night around 6, this rain was falling from about 7 o'clock. So we usually don't have this water. We usually just have a little bit. This house never ever really flood. That's how we know it bad. The water start rising from the back, as you can see. And then the front started, and then it come right through. So then I had to take my daughter, we had to pack whatever we could, and evacuate, along with the dog. When they came back, everything wet. Everything from the front to the back, the stove, the beds, everything.
The residents believe a clogged canal nearby plays a major part in the flooding, and they would like the authorities to at least resolve that issue. Kent Gerson, CBC News.
And our roving reporter Shane Jones was also out and about this morning with photographer Trevor Murray and reports on a number of affected areas.
This is about as far out as I can go. This is Husband's new development. And as you can see, this open back vehicle right here last night, what we understand is that the driver was trying to drive through there, obviously didn't know how deep it was, and he stalled right up until this morning. We're going to try to talk to some neighbors in the community and find out what exactly happened, how often this area floods out. This vehicle in Husband's new development, St. Michael, was one of the many across the island that fell victim to high flood waters. One of the residents in the area was an eyewitness to what happened.
Last night I was in my gallery sitting down, standing actually, but I hear the van hard, so when I look, I see it stick up. So he was trying to put it in reverse, that would get my angle. So then I see holler for help, and then my aunt come out, and then he like just climb out. I went to the gallery there.
Kira Hart, who didn't want to speak on camera, was still a little shaken up this morning after she and her 4-year-old daughter were trapped in her car in the middle of very high water in Lowlands last night. She recounted what happened before members of the Barbados Defence Force rescued her.
I couldn't go forward and I couldn't go back.
How high was the water?
Well, the water at the front gets as high as about 13 feet. I found out after that there was a Suzuki Swift submerged there, but during that time that I was stuck, I didn't see it. And I understand that the guy had to swim out from in there as well. So I didn't know how to get a message to anyone. My phone was at 0, so I barely had enough charge to turn my phone on and see if I could update my WhatsApp stat really quick. So I sent out messages. I said, stuck in Lowlands, I need help.
And next we headed to Bridgetown. We're right at the back of the Constitution River Terminal. And as you can see, more water again. Passengers were at the terminal waiting for PSVs, which were a little slow in coming, but they eventually were able to move commuters to their destinations. We fortunately caught up with Transport and Works Minister Dr. William Duguid, who expressed concern about the construction of the new terminal.
I'm very disappointed, especially that where the police sit in the police outpost is heavily flooded, and that's a total building leak. We also have problems here on this walkway where water is coming in, and the walkway is very slippery. And in fact, while we were filming earlier, you actually saw somebody fall on the walkway, and I myself sit on the walkway. So we have to do something about this walkway, and we're doing that urgently as well. I'm happy to see that the public service vehicles are operating again. I know you can't see very many here now, but we have seen quite a few coming and going over the last few minutes. And generally, I found that most areas, we do have pockets of flooding in various areas, but most areas the water collected and then have seemed to run off reasonably quickly.
So a rainy morning right across the island today. Shane Jones, CBC News.
Well, mere hours after several people were rescued as rising floodwater threatened their Wharton Christchurch homes, the Christchurch East Central District Emergency Organization moved in to clear blocked wells in the area. And they found an alternative way via a boat in the flooded street to reach the problem drains and assist affected residents in the flooded Cherrywood Circle. The rains also stalled a number of cars. Interim Chairman of the Christchurch East Central District Emergency Organization, Rawls Seeley, says that the DEO was quick to act on receiving calls for assistance from residents last night.
In this area in particular, I received some information about a pregnant lady and some persons being trapped inside of their homes. So I basically just called her into the DEM as well and let the BDF know so they can come and rescue these persons that needed assistance. And they were rescued earlier last night.
Mr. Seeley says that the DEO will continue to monitor the situation there. Meantime, Acting Prime Minister Dale Marshall toured some of the areas affected by flooding this afternoon. He was joined by various officials and ministers, including Acting Attorney General Edmund Hinkson and Information Minister Senator Lucille Moe. The first stop on that tour was the Princess Alice Pump House in the city. Then it was over to the Bayland, where crews were preparing to pump the remaining flood water from where it had settled in the neighborhood. The tour then moved over to Wharton Christchurch, where most of that water had receded and the residents were busy cleaning up. It was there that we met Elijah Hall, who credited the quick action of neighbors and the Barbados Defense Force with saving some of her possessions and ultimately her life.
About 10 o'clock, the water started coming in the house, rising up to the level of the house. So that's when the next door neighbors then called for help from the Barbados Defense Force. And they came, but the problem was that they didn't have enough lifeboats, so they were waiting on us to come up with lifeboats. But then after the water raised to the level of the electricity, they had to evacuate us immediately and turn off the breakers because we were at risk of being electrocuted. So they took off their life jackets and passed one on me and my son and help us out.
And Mr. Marshall says that the government is working to address the issue of flooding.
The technical officers from the Ministry of Public Works have indicated to us that they expect that with new technologies they're going to be able to more effectively do drainage wells in this area. So as long as Minister Strong can find the funding, and I think he's very incentivized to find funding to allow MPW to do this, we hope that we can put the residents of Wharton in a situation where they wouldn't expect to have this again.
And for a quick look now at the current weather and where Kirk is headed, here is meteorologist Wayne McGarry. Good evening, Wayne.
Hi, good evening, Lisa, and blessed good evening to our viewers. Now, at 5 p.m., the center of Kirk was located 14.7 degrees north, 64.7 degrees west. This is about 366 miles to the northwest of Barbados. Now, this system continues to track west-northwestward now, maximum at about 14 miles per hour. Maximum sustained winds have decreased to 40 miles per hour. And we will continue to see an improvement in conditions throughout the night.
All right, Wayne will be back in our weather segment a little later. Well, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Amor-Motley, has told the United Nations Barbados, the Caribbean and the Pacific need decisive action taken to address issues of climate change. In her address at the 73rd session, she noted that her speech was made against the background of a number of natural events over the last 24 hours, which included Tropical Storm Kirk, which has impacted Barbados and its neighbors. She told the leaders that climate change is a matter of life and death for the region.
We will make the decisions that we have to make on a national level. We have committed to ban single-use plastics and styrofoam from April of next year. We will ensure that we can try to become a fossil fuel-free country by 2030. But what does this mean against the background of a world that is not prepared to put the funding in place to be able to stop those worst aspects of climate change? What does this mean to people who are relying on a green climate fund because their per capita income or their capacity to be able to provide for their people is simply not there?
And Prime Minister Motley announced her early return to Barbados from that meeting while stressing that time is running out to make some crucial decisions on climate change.
I leave here to cut short my trip to go home to my country. Some may say that in spite of the flooding, we were lucky that Tropical Storm Kirk did not do greater damage. 2 weeks ago in San Francisco, it was Isaac. I say simply that we cannot plan our affairs or that of our people on the basis of luck. It must be on the basis of policy and decisive action.
A green paper aimed at modernizing the island's town planning legislation and planning systems has been drafted, and Barbadians are being asked to examine and comment on it. The president of the Town Planning Society, Dr. Yolanda Aline, joins us now to give some understanding of what's in this paper. Good evening, Dr. Aline.
Good evening, Lisa.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us, why has the reform of the town planning legislation become necessary at this time?
Well, the reform of the town planning legislation is necessary because the legislation that governs physical planning in Barbados is more than 50 years old. It is rooted in old UK legislation, and obviously, therefore, it has its roots in a different place, a different era. And at this time, we have changed a lot. Our socioeconomic conditions have changed a lot since 50 years ago. We're far more urbanized than we were then. And even the principles that govern planning have changed over time. And so we need to now develop a system that is fit for purpose in Barbados.
What are some of these significant changes coming with this legislation?
Some of the significant changes would include greater efficiency and transparency and inclusiveness in the way in which we make planning decisions. Efficiency in terms of the time frame taken to make decisions whereas the current system allows us to do the residential developments quite quickly. The more significant ones have taken an extended period of time and sometimes, and we want to make that a bit better.
And that has always been a concern.
That has always been a concern, yes.
Okay, and why is it so necessary to have the public comment on this legislation, this draft?
I think as you know, matters relating to physical planning, physical development, land management are all about how we live, where we live, how we work and where our visitors and where our economy gets its money. It's everybody's business. As we think about the global issues that we are dealing with, climate change adaptation, and as we think about vulnerability to hazards, and as we think about sustainable development, those matters are often usually hinged on a sound planning platform, a platform that deals with land management and land use. And it becomes everybody's business because everybody has some level of responsibility. So it is important that people look at the decision-making framework that is being drafted and have their say at this time.
And how can the public actually access this document and submit their views?
Well, there's a website available it's gisbarbados.gov.bb, and the green paper can be downloaded at that site. And also there's a Barbados Integrated Government Portal, www.gov.bb. And the public is also asked to email their comments at greenpapercomments@barbados.gov.bb. tongue.gov.bb.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Aline, for joining us. That's President of the Tongue Planning Society, Dr. Yolanda Aline. Thank you. While Barbadians are being encouraged to add their voice to the call for action to combat childhood obesity, one of the directors of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, Professor Anne St. John, says that they can do so by logging on to the website www.toomuchjunk.org and signing the petition developed by the Healthy Caribbean Lifestyle Coalition. Professor St. John, who is a consultant pediatrician, says that there has been a cultural change in recent decades in diet and refined foods consumption.
Recent surveys have revealed 18.5% of students consume fast foods 3 or more times a week. 73 reported drinking 1 or more carbonated beverages a day. 15% of the sample reported consumption of no fruit and vegetables in the last month. 70% reported low levels of physical activity. 65% engaged in sedentary activity at school after hours. Our children and youth, as you are aware, spend time, waking time, either at school or away from school. There are instances with situations in both which quite facilitate and even encourage unhealthy living, leading to overweight and obesity.
Meantime, country program specialist for the Pan American Health Organization, Dr. Patrice Lawrence Williams, suggests that there is a clear link between socioeconomic status and obesity.
If we explore what might be occurring in families of low socioeconomic status to increase the likelihood of childhood obesity, common ones include food-related parenting beliefs and practices. In the lower income families, food choices are primarily motivated by a desire to minimize the food budget whilst maintaining the diet of foods that were filling, unlikely to spoil, and acceptable to the husbands and children. Parental work patterns. Increasing work hours and demands of work contribute to time pressure for parents, which may compromise the family food environment.
Government is not taking the presence of dangerous plants and animals in the country's ecosystem lightly. Word of this from Minister of the Environment and National Beautification Trevor Prescott as stakeholders came together for a workshop entitled Preventing Costs of Invasive Alien Species in Barbados and the OECS. Minister Prescott says the country is currently developing strategies and policies to combat the problem, which he says could affect the economy, the environment, and even human health.
In Barbados, our invasive alien species include what is called the giant African snail and lionfish. Since invasive alien species are one of the major threats to our biological diversity, we must address this problem at the policy level.
Double whammy for residents of the Eastern Caribbean as several countries were shaken by an earthquake as Tropical Storm Kirk lashed the Lesser Antilles. The 5.6 magnitude quake registered some 91 kilometers northeast of Fort-de-France, Martinique, and struck at 8:32 this morning. It was felt in St. Lucia, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The UE Seismic Research Center says that the quake was located at latitude 15.11 degrees north and longitude 60.43 degrees west at a depth of 10 kilometers. Well, St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chastanet says that small island developing states like those here in the Caribbean need the support of larger nations. He made the comment during his address to the general debate of the 73rd session of the General Assembly of the UN in New York. Mr. Chastanet says that Caribbean states remain vulnerable to natural disasters which continue to erode the gains that they make. Mr. Chastanet says in preparation for this year's hurricane season, St. Lucia actually had to spend 3 times the amount it spent last year. He says in order to meet those costs, they had to impose new taxes to facilitate their preparedness.
For example, we've introduced a water tax to assist with the desilting of our dam, a gas tax to assist with the road rehabilitation and slope stabilization, and an airport tax to assist with the development of our new terminal, highway, and flood mitigation around the airport. St. Lucia is moving forward with an aggressive agenda to reform our institutions and to build a more resilient country. We're making difficult decisions and are committed to increasing the productivity of our government through the use of e-government. I want to acknowledge and thank Estonia for their assistance in this area. We're building resilience with the support of the UAE, who gave us assistance with engineers and loans from Taiwan to be able to rebuild our roads and to rebuild our airport.
Also speaking during today's UN debate was Guyana's Vice President and Foreign Affairs Minister Carl Greenidge. He made another impassioned plea for an end to his country's long-running border dispute with Venezuela. Now, back in January, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recommended that the Guyana-Venezuela border dispute be referred to the International Court of Justice after a year of talks failed to make any progress.
The decision of the Secretary General is binding on the parties. Accordingly, in March of this year, Guyana filed its application in the court, seeking an affirmation of the validity of the 1899 arbitral award and the international boundary that it established. Unfortunately, notwithstanding its obligation to do so, Venezuela has thus far refused to participate in the proceedings. Guyana sincerely hopes that it will change its mind. There is still time for it to do so. Guyana wishes to express its gratitude to the Secretary General for his important contribution to the resolution of this long-standing matter and looks forward to a final judgment by the International Court of Justice. The rule of law must prevail. As a responsible member of the global community, Guyana seeks peace not only in our region, but throughout the world, where the scourge of war and conflict are an obstacle to development. They divert attention away from the pressing problems of development and the enhancement of human well-being.